Welcome to All Things Financial with Jack Driscoll. Each week, Jack takes on all things you thought were hard to understand about your finances and makes it fun, easy, but most of all interesting. From insurance to the best way to save your money and squeeze the most out of the dollars you put aside for your rainy day. And now, you have a friend in the money business. Here's your host, Jack Driscoll.
Welcome back again, everyone, to another edition of All Things Financial. I wanted to do today's show on a number of things that have happened recently in other areas that have not impacted us in Pittsburgh or even really in Pennsylvania, and that's all these storms and all the damage these storms have caused, an interruption to businesses, an interruption in people's lives. And I wanted to go through something that occurred to me, obviously, and all of you too, prior to all these storms. What's going to happen? What if it happens with us? How much will we be impacted? And for the financial side of it, will our insurance cover it? And what will the insurance cover and what won't it? And I know a lot of people were starting to ask those questions right the week before those storms were coming. And folks, that's too late to start thinking about that. So now that it's happened, the hurricanes have come, the winds have come, the floods have come, there may be more. It's time for me to go through these issues again that I went through in the spring every year, usually regarding how to check and see what you are and are not covered for, what to check and see that you are and are not covered for pertaining to some of these storms. So what I wanted to do first was go through the situations that some of these people are dealing with. And some companies, corporations, have coverages that are allowing their businesses to not be as interrupted and allow them to be able to service people in need better than other businesses who right now are really scurrying just to see if they'll produce any revenues, be able to get shipments, things like that. And it could devastate and wipe out some of these businesses. So my question is, could something like that happening in your area wipe your business out? And the answer is yes, it could, whether you're insured or not. So some of these companies that are surviving are really learning some lessons from what happened with Sandy and Katrina, and have adapted their processes to, if these types of storms happen in our area, will we be able to weather those storms? Lost income, lost revenues, lost people, lost employment time, not even being able to get access into work are a lot of concerns that companies and those of you who own businesses should be listening to and paying close attention to. So first, we look at wind, we look at water, we look at mine subsidence in this area. In other areas, we're looking at earthquakes. When we deal with water, we're dealing with backup of water through sewers sometimes. We're dealing with water seeping in through basement walls sometimes. And we're dealing with surface waters flooding into basements, let's say, or even coming up over ground like happened with these floods. So are you covered? We've got trees blowing down, hitting houses. We've got roofs blowing off. So I want to go through this with you individuals first, and then I'll go to the business owners. Any wins, typically, on homeowners insurance, you will find if you pull out your policies, and I want everyone to make notes on this. If you're riding in the car and listening, come back and listen to the show. I put it up on YouTube and I have it on our website. If you get on our email list, I email these shows out so you can use those as checklists. I want you to pull out your policies and then want you to look for certain things. Number one, the definition of property covered is important because when you look at your homeowner's property, you're looking at coverage A, which is your building. The first thing we need to look at is what's your deductible and what's your co-insurance penalties, which means if you're not insured for enough, then any loss, no matter how large or small, might get depreciated or prorated based on your total coverage wasn't adequate enough, so you're going to get penalized. That's what a co-insurance penalty is. Another provision we need to make sure you have is replacement cost. Almost everyone listening to this show will have replacement cost. Almost everyone listening to this show probably has updated limits on the homeowner's policy. I don't know. But what about those of you who own properties that you rent out? They're investment properties. They're tenant occupied. What about people that have seasonal properties? Those are usually insured differently. And you might not have the same robust coverages, I'll call them, as you would on your regular primary residence or homeowners. So let's talk about this. When we have a hurricane, we have a risk of water and wind. And the problem is usually the water. Most homeowners' policies are pretty good with wind coverage, except for trees. So let's dig into this. If lightning hits your tree is pretty much covered if it falls, including chopping it up, cutting it up, bundling it, and removing the tree. And in many cases, even paying the cost to replace the lost tree. Not so for wind. We have wind exclusions on almost every insurance company's policy, and for trees. So we have good coverage for wind if the roof blows off. We have bad coverage for trees if wind blows the tree down, or a number of trees for those of you who own woods behind your house. Whether it hits what we call covered property or not is an issue. If a tree falls due to wind and it hits covered property, which is a fence or a house, that has much better coverage than if the same wind felled the tree out in the open yard that did not hit covered property. Very limited coverage, almost none, for removal of the tree that didn't hit anything. And it's usually very good coverage for a tree that hit covered property. And it doesn't say damaged covered property in most of these policies. It just says hit covered property. So if a tree falls and is leaning on your house and didn't damage the house, it hit covered property. You're in a much better position. Now, what about a tree falling on a neighbor's property? Well, we run into a different situation there, but all these homeowners claims and debates and policy declinations and denials of coverage and all, these are the issues they're going to run through. So you need to look in advance. You pull out your policies and read these policies. Call us. I'll help you review your policies, actually, for things you didn't even know to ask about. And one of them is a tree falls on a neighbor's property. And it's due to wind, let's say. Because, again, lightning has better coverage than wind does. So how do you know? Well, you look at a tree, and sometimes you'll see charring, or the claims adjuster will look for charring at a point of impact to determine that is a lightning claim or that is a wind claim. Because the tree just snapped off halfway up, sometimes you can't tell. If it's a wind claim and the tree fell on a neighbor's property, whether it covered their house, whether it hit their house or not, your own homeowner's policy most likely will not pay that claim. Here's why. If a tree falls, and again it's due to wind, and let's say you don't have any coverage on your policy, most don't, or very limited coverage for wind, maybe $250 or whatever, and it does not include removal of the tree in many cases due to wind damage, and now it falls on a neighbor's property, they're all mad at you, obviously. They say you have to remove your tree from our property, and you turn the claim into your own insurance company, and your insurance company says, we're not paying. And you say, why? I thought I was covered for everything. And they say, we pay for your liability, and you're not liable for your tree falling on a neighbor's property. You say, you must be joking. And they say, read your policy, which of course nobody does. That's why you have us, to help tell you about these things in advance of what happens and find out what you are and are not covered for. So here you find out you're not covered. Here's your tree laying across your neighbor's yard or laying on your neighbor's house. And again, what I said on wind coverage was your trees are covered if wind causes your tree to hit your covered property. Well, it's not your covered property, it's your neighbor's. So here your insurance company denies the claim in many cases, saying you were not liable. Why were you not liable? Because most insurance companies say you have to be deemed negligent in some manner to then be deemed liable. And they only pay liability on your behalf. So if you're not liable because there was no negligence, then it was just an accident. And you're not covered for that damage to other people or not, even if the tree fell out in the yard. So now your neighbor's mad at you and you're mad at the insurance company, right? Which you would be, and I would be too. But you need to know these coverage limitations, because if storms come by, who's paying for all of this? Becomes the biggest question. It's not neighbors getting mad at each other. It's where's the money coming from? Or are we not covered at all? Which brings up some questions when we talk about Florida. For those of you who have properties in Florida, there are some cases where we just won't be covered at all. You either didn't buy hurricane coverage or it won't cover adequately enough. We get hillsides. Let's say we have a problem here in Pittsburgh on the hills and we get landslides. Those aren't going to be covered. You could have your whole house slide down a hill due to earth movement, earth sliding, due to these floods or hurricanes, and no one's there to help you. So you end up having no coverage at all. These are serious issues. So what we look at in advance is, okay, what could we buy? What types of coverages are available that we don't have, that we could have? And the other is, what types of coverages just aren't available, so we need to know what risks we're assuming. That does get back to the financial planning issue. We have to be careful that you're not continuing to have to pay a mortgage for the next 20 or 25 years on a house that no longer exists. I mean, think about this. This is what these people are going through in Puerto Rico, Florida, Texas, and we're insulated from that right now for the time being. We don't know what will ever happen in Pennsylvania, that it'll be our turn. So that's why I bring this show out, to try to identify many of these areas that can impact your financial planning, ruin your financial and retirement plans through no fault of your own, and this is one of them. So I'm taking this time, because of all the devastation and turmoil that's happening all around us, to shore up your own finances and make sure your insurances apply to the best of the ability that you could buy coverage for. So let's again get back to this tree that fell in the neighbor's yard. There's no negligence, your insurance company determines. So here are your choices. You could fight your insurance company. You could take them to court. You could go to the insurance commissioner's office. There are some actions you could take if you disagree with them, including hiring an attorney. The other thing is, you have a neighbor, and although your insurance company is applying the negligence rule for liability and denying that claim and saying it's your claim, so we'll give you the marginal coverage for windstorm, and it's determined because there's no proof otherwise that it was windstorm and not lightning, which would have covered the removal of that tree much better. But again, now the question is it out in the yard of your neighbor? Because if it is, they're stuck with the same problem you are on wind when they turn the claim into their homeowners. Now, yes, they can turn the claim into their homeowner's policy on your tree and say, there's a tree on my yard, will you pay to remove the tree? Their homeowner's policy probably has the same provisions that yours does, that says any tree that fell in your yard. It doesn't say your tree, it says any tree that fell in your yard. They might have some removal coverage, they might not, for wind. So they need to find that out also. So both of you are turning a claim into your homeowner's policies. They may be mad at you already by now. They may say, why should we have to pay? Or even turn a claim in on our homeowner's policy and have a claim against our record for your tree. So now you two are fighting all over the place. But these are the things that can happen. And that's the simplest of situations where we have a tree that fell. But what if it hit their house or a fence? Well, now they fall potentially under the definition of tree hitting covered property. And even though it's by wind, normally, whether there's damage or not to that covered property, many times the policy will pay now to completely remove the tree. And that then you need to ask the question, well, you don't want to ask the question, but you need to be cognizant of, does that mean remove the tree from the covered property, or does that mean remove the tree off the premises? What I mean is, does that mean just moving the tree, lifting it away from the house and laying it on the ground? Does that satisfy the obligation of coverage, removing it from the covered property? Or is it cutting the tree all up and getting it off your yard? So those are the issues many people are dealing with. It can be $1,000 to remove a tree or a number of trees or more. Now, what if the tree damages the covered property? Is that covered? Yes, it is under almost every homeowner's policy. So you will find these different provisions in your homeowner's insurance. You need to know the difference. That's windstorm. Now, wind to the house, blowing shingles off, blowing roofs off, breaking windows. Typically, you will find very good coverage for wind on a homeowner's policy. You will also find typically very good coverage for the building for wind and water due to, let's say, hurricane-type losses. So we have a tornado come in, that's wind. We have a hurricane come in, that's wind and water. It can turn into the case if you're on these coastal properties of wind, water, and flood. So we have to be careful here, because by definition, flood's covered differently than water, is differently than wind. But let's take this wind blowing our roofs off, blowing windows or breaking windows or blowing siding off. Typically, you're going to find pretty good coverage on there. Now, what about then subsequent or even simultaneous water through the rains coming in through the building? Okay, we have some issues here. Almost every homeowner's policy, the standard homeowner's policy, says this: special perils is building definition of coverage, and named perils is for contents inside the house, definitions of coverage. All right, you'll ask, what's the difference? Well, here's a potential difference. Water comes in through the hole in your roof, or your shingles just lift due to the winter, let's say, and then rain comes in. Normally, buildings, the house itself, you will see coverage apply. And normally, on many policies, you will see coverage on the contents be denied. Because contents is normally covered, and you again, I'll do an analysis on your policies for any of those who want it. Named perils applies to contents, meaning only the named perils listed in the policy. There are only about 17 of them, are what your contents are covered for. So the majority of people listening to this show right now and watching this show are only covered for 16 or 17 things that can happen to your contents. Everything else beyond those 16 or 17 items aren't covered, and most of us don't even know that. What's covered? Fire, theft, burglary, water pipes breaking. But it doesn't say water. When you look at your named perils, it's easy for you to look this stuff up. Pull your policy out, flip open to the pages, contents, and you'll see building, and it'll be coverage A, and it'll be a small paragraph. You'll see coverage B for appurtenant structures, like if you have a shed out back. You go to C, and it'll be a big long list of numbers, and it'll be numbered property coverages, and it's called named perils. And you look and you say, wait a minute, Jack Driscoll said on the show, I need to read each one of these named perils, and anything that is not one of these 17 items, and within the definition of those 17 items, I'm not covered, all my contents aren't covered for. And one of them, yes, is water coming in through roofs. You will not see that as one of those named perils. So you could have huge losses due to water coming into your home and find out they'll pay the building coverage, they'll pay the they'll pay the carpet, they'll pay the plastering, they'll pay the roof damages, but you're on your own for all your electronics, all your couches, all your artwork, all these things inside the house. And you never knew. So you say, why didn't you ever tell me that to your insurance agent? Your insurance agent will say, you never asked. So I'm bringing out the show to get you to ask. I want you to pull those policies. I want you to look and see. You'll see your policies look exactly like I just described for most of you, not all of you. And sometimes we then look at buying the full coverage that we have on the building called special perils commonly, and we can change the contents coverage to say the same thing. And when we do the special perils definition instead of the named perils definition, it's like looking at a picture and then looking at a negative. Everything's opposite, right? So what's black is white, what's white is black. What happens on special perils is it says we cover you for, it's not named. We cover you for all perils except named exceptions or exclusions. So there, they list the exclusions. And if they forget to list an exclusion, it's automatically covered. On named perils, they list the coverages. And if they forget to list the coverage, it's automatically excluded. You see the difference? It's huge. So you get to the special perils. It used to be called all risk coverage, but it's not all risk, so they don't call it that anymore. But special perils or open perils, or what they're called, are saying, unless it's excluded, we have to cover it. You could buy that coverage on contents. And then we get to artwork and fine arts, and I'm going to tell you further exclusions apply. So even though you do the special or open perils on building and on contents, then you get to your fine arts, your jewelry, your firearms, your collectibles, your antiques. As collectibles, especially the breakable collectibles, are not usually covered for breakage. So all those things fall off the wall and breakage is excluded. This isn't a good time to find out about that after a loss, right? That's why I do the show. I'm trying to alert everyone in advance what to look for that pertain to financial planning. I don't want people wiped out or hurt in areas that were preventable and avoidable with just a little bit of oversight and foresight. So call our office. I'll help guide you through this maze and quagmire of the unknown, actually. But the fine arts, the paintings on the wall, things like that, water gets on those, they're ruined. And here you're not covered because you didn't know you should schedule those items or get appraisals, have them specifically scheduled, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many areas. And then we get to water. What about this water from these floods that these people are going through? We look at all the pictures and they're under 4 feet of water, 10 feet of water. What happens there? Do we have flood insurance? Do they have flood insurance? Hey, people in a flood zone might, but many of these places getting flooded, and many of our places here that have been flooded, are nowhere near a flood zone, but they're still getting flooded. So are you covered on your homeowners? No, you are not. I'm telling you, you're not. What do you need? Flood insurance. Who buys that? People buy flood insurance who would live in a flood zone. That's who buys that. The rest don't. So you're on your own. Now your basement is underwater. We have basements. A lot of the places down in Florida don't. That compounds the problem. Our furnace, our air conditioners, our hot water heaters, all of our contents down there, maybe even our cars are stuck inside the garage, which, by the way, cars have some flood coverage on there, on the auto policies sometimes. A lot of them do. But I have a caution on the financial planning side. Be careful. When you buy used cars after floods, and you don't know it's a flood car, you have to be a little careful. It's risky because the insurance company, let's say we have a car and it's in the garage or whatever and it gets flooded, or it's a car lot and it gets flooded and all the cars get fixed. We may have trouble with wiring forever. So the owner says, hey, after this car is fixed, I'm selling this car. I don't want to deal with those problems. You know, and here you end up buying unwittingly a flood car and don't know it. So you have to be careful there. We have cautions on that. And there are going to be a lot of those hitting the market. So we look at this and then we look at, okay, what about this backup of water through sewers caused the water to rise up in the basement because all the sewers got flooded? Is that a flood, which is not covered on most homeowners' policies? Or is that backup of water through sewers, which is covered on most homeowners' policies? How do you determine that? Well, the insurance company determines what? It's a flood, right? So they don't have to pay the claim. The homeowner determines what? Well, it's backup of water through sewers, because then they would have to pay that claim. So you need to know your definitions. And we also need to know, do we need to buy flood insurance even though we're not in a flood zone? Which brings up mine subsidence also. It's a separate issue. But because of the disasters or hurricanes and floods right now, doesn't mean that ours won't be mine subsidence or something else, or hill slides or earth slides. So we have to know, here are your questions. What can I buy? And then what will I buy on insurance coverages? So the important thing is, you don't have to buy everything. You just have to know everything that is available. So after the fact, you could blame yourself if you didn't buy it. If you don't know everything that is available, then you're going to blame someone else. And I'm going to say, no, you still have to blame yourself for not knowing. Because I put this show out, so you're given the opportunity to find out about these things in advance. So now it is your choice on what to and not to buy. I don't want to make you insurance poor. But I also don't want to make you poor or rob your retirement savings and have to crack your IRAs and 401ks for emergency funds to pay for things that very small amounts of premiums could have purchased the insurance for you and transferred that risk to an insurance company had you only known those coverages were available. So those are important considerations that every one of us needs to evaluate in looking over our insurance when we read the newspapers and see what's happening in Puerto Rico, and Mexico had the earthquake, and Texas has Harvey, and we go down to Florida and we look at all the different problems, even Sandy in New York a couple years ago, and you look and say that could happen to us, and it could, and you know it could. So I want you to pull the policies. Any of you have questions, want a thorough analysis, a double check of, number one, are your agents doing what they're supposed to be doing and getting this information out to you in advance, which may not be happening. Number two, if you're shopping for insurance online on your do-it-yourself program, give us a call. We'll do a review for you. We know the questions to look for that you don't know to ask. See if we can help you firm up and shore up your own financial vault of insurance where you're trying to transfer that risk to someone else. All right, folks, I hope this show's helped alert some of you at least to the need for pre-planning on your insurance policies and not wasting your money thinking you're covered for things you're not. I appreciate all of you tuning in and watching the show, listening on radio. I'll be back again next week for another edition of All Things Financial.